Hello, I'm Jeff Paur, senior writer for RealTime Fantasy Sports. Welcome to the RealTime Fantasy Sports Show. It is week 6 of the fantasy football season, and it's time for starts, sits, and sleepers. This is when we go over each position, telling you some starts, sits, and sleepers for QB, running back, receiver, and tight end. And I'm going to be joined today by a contributing writer here at RealTime Fantasy Sports, Evan Webb. Evan, thanks so much for joining me on the show today. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Should be a good week of action. Actually, the games don't look great this week if you look at them, unfortunately. I'm sure they'll be good to watch, even though some of these matchups aren't the best. Hopefully, they still turn out pretty well. But some of the matchups don't look great this week, do they?
Yeah, it's some not too great matchups, but hey, it's still football. We're still gonna have it on.
Exactly. We're still going to watch it, definitely. And I know I will. And the bye week start this week as well. So definitely want to consider some of these sleepers we're going to tell you for this week. You could need them this week with some of the injuries and teams on a bye this week. So definitely something to pay attention to. Let's jump into it, Evan. Let's start at the QB position first. Who's your start for this week at QB?
Yeah, I'm gonna ride the hot hand, and I'm gonna go with Geno Smith. I mean, I think he's proved the last couple of weeks that you got to keep riding him, and he's got 7 touchdown passes in his last 3 games, and Arizona has allowed the seventh most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. So I think it's a good matchup for him, and so yeah, I'd say ride the hot hand, and I would start him over guys, especially if you have like Matt Stafford or Russell Wilson, Aaron Rodgers, those types of guys. I would drive Geno Smith this week.
Yeah, who would have thought you would have said that before the season started? I agree with you. He's played great. 2 great receivers to work with, completing a high number of passes. So good call there. My start is Kirk Cousins. So he hasn't been great this year, but I thought he had his best game of the season last week. 296 yards, 2 touchdowns, and he does have 3 games with 20 plus fantasy points. He hasn't had that huge game yet. I think that might come this week against Miami. They allow the 3rd most fantasy points to QBs. Miami has also allowed 300-yard passers 3 of their last 4 games. So I think Cousins is going to have his best game to date and post big numbers for the Vikings in week 6. All right, how about on the flip side, Evan? Who are you sitting at QB this week?
Yeah, I'm going to sit Russell Wilson. Like as I just mentioned, talking about Geno Smith. If you have Russell Wilson, I would sit him this week. For one, he's dealing with kind of a shoulder injury. He will play this week, but that's something to kind of watch out for. And again, last week was just a terrible game by Russell Wilson against the Colts, and I don't really expect him to. I expect a little bit of a better game, but still, I don't expect him to put too many points up this week against the Chargers. So, yeah, I'm gonna go with Russ as the sit this week.
All right, my sit's another veteran quarterback as well. Another guy I never thought I'd be putting on this list, but it's Aaron Rodgers, and he just has not been very good. He's yet to top 20 fantasy points in a game this year. So I think if you have better options, I would go with them. Even a guy like Geno Smith, like you mentioned, who many people didn't think would be on fantasy radars, but he definitely is now. And Rodgers just is not getting it done. Does not seem on the same page with his young receivers still, especially last week. Missed on a lot of throws he normally makes. And when you look at this matchup against the Jets, you think, hey, that might not be a bad one. But they've been actually pretty good against the pass this year. They've allowed fewer than 200 passing yards each of their last 2 games, 10th overall against the pass. I think it could be more of the same for Rodgers this week, another ho-hum performance for him in week 6. All right, Evan, how about a sleeper at QB for this week?
I'm going to go with Jimmy Garoppolo. He had his first good game last week against Carolina. Now, Carolina is not a good team this year, but 18 of 30, 253 yards, 2 touchdown passes, and he's facing another bad defense this week in the Atlanta Falcons. So I like Jimmy G again for at least this week as maybe a sleeper. So yeah, I think Jimmy G is a good pick to maybe look to add this week.
Yeah, I like him this week as well. My sleeper is a little more scary to suggest, but I'm going to do it, and it's Justin Fields. I thought he had his best game of the season last week. Still was not great, but he topped 200 passing yards for the first time this year, scored 19.1 fantasy points. What really helps him is his rushing ability, at least 47 rushing yards, 3 straight games. So that helps his floor. And I actually think he could throw the ball well this week against Washington. They allow the 11th most fantasy points to quarterbacks, and they've allowed 11 passing touchdowns this season, which is the 2nd highest total in football. So if he gets a couple passing scores, rushes for 50 yards, pretty good fantasy day in the end. And this game is the Thursday night game, not a really good one on paper, Washington and Chicago, but regardless, you might be watching it if you're starting Justin Fields this week, who I think could actually have a decent performance in this one. Let's move on to running back, Evan. Let's talk about a start at running back. Who do you got?
Yeah, I got Jeff Wilson Jr. from the 49ers. 17 rushing attempts last week for 120 yards. He's not getting a ton of red zone action as Tevin Coleman's kind of got some of those, but he is putting up the yardage. And I don't really see him. Again, it's kind of like what I mentioned with Jimmy G, playing a bad Atlanta defense. I think he's going to get a lot of opportunities this week and add to that good stat total, at least yardage wise, that he did last week. So I like Jeff Wilson as a start this week.
Yeah, I like Jeff Wilson too. My start is Ramondre Stevenson with the New England Patriots. So Damian Harris is out, could be out several weeks with a hamstring injury. Stevenson excelled in that lead back role last week, ran 25 times for 161 yards. He has at least 12 fantasy points, 3 straight games, though. So he's been getting it done even with Harris in the lineup. Now he's the lead back against the Browns, who allow the 4th most fantasy points to running backs. And they were torched on the ground last week. They've allowed 200 plus passing yards each for their last 2 games. So really struggling against the run. And I think New England's going to run the ball a lot again this week, probably with Zappe as their starting quarterback once again. So I think Stevenson's going to be a great play, maybe even a top 10 option this week when you're starting your lineups. All right, move on to sits. Guys, we don't like this week at running back. Who do you not like, Evan?
Yeah, I don't like. I just think Zeke Elliott. I mean, it's hard to not put him in the lineup just because of the name, but it's like he just is still yet to kind of put up the points. I mean, right now he's averaging about 3 yards per rush. I mean, last week he had 22 rushes, but again, he's only averaging about 3 yards per rush. So it's kind of like until he proves it to me, like I'm gonna probably start a guy like Jeff Wilson over him just because I just think that his yards per rush is down. And I think Tony Pollard's honestly been probably the better, at least fantasy player this year, and probably the overall better running back this year. So, yeah, I'm going to go with Zeke Elliott as my sit.
Yeah, 2 things against Zeke, too, is he is not catching the ball. That's one thing that is not good for him. That usually helps him, his floor at least, because he gets some catches. But he's not catching the ball this year. The only thing I think really helping him get on the field is his blocking ability. He does a much better job in pass protection than Pollard. Pollard could, fix that area of his game. I think he'd be on the field a lot more, but that helps Zeke get on the field. But again, he's not producing. I don't like him as well this weekend. Another star back that I wouldn't thought I'd be recommending sitting, but it's Najee Harris. He is just not doing anything right now. 2 straight games with fewer than 8 fantasy points. His season high in rushing yards is just 74. I think he got off to a bad start to the season because of his injury to start the year. He had that foot injury, so that slowed him even before the season started. I don't think he's healthy. He just doesn't look like the same back as last year. And then Jaylen Warren, they're talking about getting him more involved in the offense too. I just think that's a lot of red flags for Harris, especially this week against the Bucs. They allow the 2nd fewest fantasy points of running backs, just 115.6 rushing yards per game. I think Pittsburgh could get behind in this game pretty big and have to throw the ball a lot, which could really limit Harris as well. So I don't like Harris at all. If you have better options, I would consider them. All right, let's move on to the sleeper running back. Evan, who's your sleeper?
Yeah, I got Tyler Algier from the Falcons. Patterson is out again this week, it looks like. So I think Tyler Algier is going to get majority of the rushing attempts as he did last week. So I think he'll put up some points. They're playing a tough 49ers team, but I do think he's going to get some yardage and at least pick up some points this week with Patterson out. So I like Algier this week.
All right, my sleeper is Eno Benjamin of the Arizona Cardinals. It's not official yet with James Conner. We'll still know later in the week. So if you're watching this on the weekend, you probably already know. But if it's Thursday and you're watching this video, his status is still up in the air. But either way, I think Conner is going to be limited in that game because of his rib injury. He's pretty sore. So even if he plays, I think Benjamin will get a good amount of work. And then Darrell Williams is out as well. So that means that Benjamin's really the last man standing, outside of James Conner if he ends up playing. So I really like Benjamin. I thought he looked well last week when he got expanded work in that running game. And then he plays Seattle. They allow the 6th most fantasy points of running backs, dead last against the run this year, 170.2 rushing yards per game. So I think Benjamin could really be a nice flex play for teams this week, especially if you're looking for a bye week or injury replacement. Move on to receiver now. Evan, who's your start at receiver for week 6?
Yeah, I'm going to go with Devin Duvernay from the Ravens. He's kind of turned into a little bit of like a mini Debo Samuel in a way. I mean, he's getting a lot of rushing attempts as well as his receiving yards. So I like Duvernay a lot, and he's also somebody that you never know, he might return a touchdown for a kick return. So I think he's an explosive guy. He's getting better and better. It seems like each week, becoming one of the probably the top wide receiver option for Lamar Jackson right now. So I like Duvernay a lot, and I think I think he's going to get progressively better as the season goes along too. So yeah, I like Duvernay.
Yeah, as long as Rashad Bateman's out, I think Duvernay is definitely a good play. He gets a lot of looks, and like you said, a variety of different ways too. So I like that call on him. My start is Chris Godwin of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I think he's back to full strength, recovered from his torn ACL from last year, hamstring injury from earlier this year. He's just racking up the work. 13 catches on 16 targets his last 2 games. I think the entire Bucs passing game seems to be clicking right now with all their top targets finally getting healthy. But Godwin, he's the volume guy in that offense. He gets a ton of volume, and I think he'll get it again this week against Pittsburgh. They were dreadful against the pass last week, all sorts of beat up in the secondary and along the line. So I think the Bucs are going to throw all over them, and they're 31st overall against the pass this year as well, and they allow the most fantasy points to receivers. So I'm looking for Godwin to have his best game of the season in week 6. All right, how about a sit at receiver, Evan?
Yeah, I'm going to go with Deontay Johnson from Pittsburgh Steelers. He's coming off kind of a hip injury. He's going to play this week, but I think he's going to be a little bit limited. And he's coming off a game where he only had 5 receptions, and the week before he only had 2. So they're still kind of figuring out the quarterback situation. I mean, I think Kenny Pickett's going to be the guy, but I just don't like him this week, and they're playing a tough Tampa Bay defense too. So I think Deontay Johnson's a good sit for this week.
Yeah, and Kenny Pickett definitely seems to favor George Pickens as well. It's something else to consider with the Johnson situation. My sit is Drake London, the rookie receiver from Atlanta. I do like him as a player. I'm a little concerned, though, his usage last week. Kyle Pitts was out. Now, he will be back in the lineup this week. It looks like he's practicing this week. But with Pitts out, London played a season low 67% of the snaps last week. I don't know what the heck's going on in Atlanta. It just doesn't make sense. He's their best playmaker, but he's had two straight games with fewer than 8 fantasy points. Passing game's really struggling with Marcus Mariota as their thrower. And I think he has a really hard matchup this week against San Francisco. They allow the 7th fewest fantasy points for receivers, 3rd overall against the pass. So I think London could struggle again in this matchup. All right, how about a sleeper at receiver, Evan?
Yeah, I'm going to go with a guy that we've mentioned actually a lot recently, and that's Alec Pierce from the Indianapolis Colts. I thought he had probably his best game of his career last week against the Broncos, which is hard to say in a 12-9 game, but he did pick up a lot of those receptions late in the game when Indianapolis was driving there late. And Matt Ryan is starting to target him more and more. And again, 8 of 9 last week for 81 yards. So I like his usage. I wouldn't be surprised if he gets in the end zone at some point this weekend.
Yeah, I like Pierce a lot too this week. My sleeper is Darius Slayton with the Giants. He's kind of the last man standing in that offensive passing game. I know Robinson could come back this week, the rookie who was impressive in the preseason. But even if he plays, it's his first game back in a long time. I still think Slayton's going to be the number one option in this passing game this week. He had 6 catches for 79 yards on 7 targets last week. This offense is actually playing pretty well despite all the deficiencies at receiver. Somehow they're getting it done. And they play the Ravens this week. They're going to need to score some points. And the Ravens have struggled against the pass all year. They allowed the 3rd most fantasy points to receivers. I know they've been a little better lately, made some adjustments, playing more zone defense. But still, I think Baltimore can be had through the air. They've allowed 290-plus passing yards 3 of 5 games. Giants could be playing from behind. I think Slayton has another productive showing in this matchup. Let's move on to the always exciting tight end position. It's been really top-heavy this year, but a couple guys have played a little better lately, so that's a little encouraging for everybody who doesn't have Mark Andrews and Travis Kelce, I should say. So who's the tight end for you this week to start?
Yeah, it's David Njoku. I mean, like you said, outside of the guys like Mark Andrews or Travis Kelsey, maybe even some of those other guys, some of those other top end tight ends. I mean, David Njoku's been probably the sixth best overall tight end this year, fantasy wise, and 6 targets for 88 yards last week. And I think he's going to have another solid game. And you're not really competing with much with the with the tight ends right now, but I think he's going to have another good game. If you don't have one of those top end tight ends, I think David Njoku is a good start, at least for this week.
Yeah, he's been red hot lately. I like him as well. My start is Zach Ertz with the Arizona Cardinals. He has at least 6 receptions, 4 straight games, double-digit fantasy points every game this year. He hasn't been huge but consistent, which is good for fantasy owners at this tight end position, which hasn't been very good this year. And Seattle, who they're playing, allows the most fantasy points at tight ends. So I think Ertz is a great play in this matchup. I'm looking for him to have another good showing. Maybe he finds the end zone this week as well and really pads those fantasy numbers. So I think Ertz is a great play in week 6. All right, how about a sit at tight end for you, Evan?
Yeah, this one's a pretty easy one just for what he's done this year and what he's dealing with injury-wise. But Dawson Knox, I think it's an easy sit. This probably isn't going to surprise that many people, but he's dealing with a foot injury. Now he's dealing with a hamstring injury too. If you're like me and you have Dawson Knox in your league, you've always consecutively each week been like, oh, do I start him? Do I sit him? It's like it's just been that way every week, and I think he's an easy sit this week, especially if you have one of those decent tight ends on your bench that can pick up a couple points. He just hasn't put up hardly any production at all, and he's been now dealing with the injuries. So I think he's an easy sit. But it does look like he's going to play this week, so you might have a decision to make.
Yeah, I'm like you. He has to show me something on the field before I'm starting him at this point. He's done next to nothing. So I agree with that assessment there. And I'm going to sit Tyler Conklin, who actually has done something on the field, but not recently. So he got off to a great start this year, was racking up the targets, but he's been a little quiet the last couple of weeks with Zach Wilson as a starting QB. He didn't catch a pass last week, which was a huge disappointment. He has fewer than double-digit fantasy points, 2 straight games. Now he plays the Packers, really good defense that allows the 5th fewest fantasy points at tight end. So while Conklin was hot early in the year, I'm not liking him at this point. I need him to start rebounding and getting more targets and more looks in that passing game before I trust him again. And I definitely don't trust him this week against Green Bay. All right, how about a sleeper at tight end, Evan?
Yeah, another guy that we've mentioned before, and that's Will Dissly from the Seattle Seahawks. He did kind of have a comeback to earth game last week, only putting up 21 yards receiving. But he's facing an Arizona defense, which has allowed the second most tight end reception yards. So I think he's going to get some opportunities against Arizona this week. And I like him as a sleeper pick, especially if you have one of these tight ends like Dawson Knox or some of these other guys that are just you don't know what you're going to get. I like Dissly this week.
Yeah, if you haven't figured it out, both Evan and I liking targeting the Seattle-Arizona game. We have a lot of players we've mentioned in that game. Should be a high-scoring one. Not very good defense, but good offenses. So definitely one to target. I agree with the Dissly call. That was my other choice when I was going through trying to figure out who I was going to pick as my sleeper. That was my second choice. My first one, Evan Ingram. I like him a lot this week. I actually had him on our waiver wire video as well, but he had a season high 10 targets last week, caught 6 passes for 69 yards. He has at least 4 receptions, 3 of 5 games. Plays a Colts team that allows the 5th most fantasy points at tight ends as well. So he's out there in a lot of leagues as well. He's not owned in every league, and he's been producing pretty consistent numbers in a good Jacksonville offense right now. So I like Ingram a lot as a sleeper at tight end. All right, Evan, that's the start, sits, and sleepers video for this week. I appreciate you joining me. Really appreciate you coming on, giving your insight.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Jeff.
Always a lot of fun. All right, Evan, we'll do it again sometime soon. Appreciate it.
Awesome.
All right, this has been Jeff Paur for RealTime Fantasy Sports. Good luck in all of your games in week 6. Have a great day, everybody.